You don't forget a smell like that. Pine sap and lake water and something that only existed in that one place, in those woods, on that particular stretch of shore in western North Carolina. I carried it home in my clothes every summer for 11 years. My husband used to say I smelled like the mountains when I walked back through the door, and he'd hold me a little longer than usual, like he was trying to breathe it in before I lost it. He didn't get to smell it from the source. That's the part that still catches me sometimes, when I'm not expecting it. We had talked about that land for years. Not seriously at first, the way you talk about things when life is still full and you think there's always more time. We'd drive through Bryson City on the way to see his mother, and my husband would slow down near the lake and say, someday he'd point at the tree lines. He'd say he wanted a porch wide enough to sit on with nowhere to be. He was 61 when he died. Heart attack on a Wednesday morning in March. He had just made coffee. The grief was its own country. I lived there for almost a year before I started to come back. What pulled me back partly was a decision. The life insurance money, and what I had saved from 32 years of teaching school. I used it to buy 4.5 acres on the edge of a cove outside Bryson City. And then I spent 2 summers and every spare dollar building the cabin I had always meant to build with him. I picked out the wood for the floors myself. I drove 40 minutes to a mill and put my hands on the planks until I found the right ones. I chose the stone for the fireplace. I planted the hydrangeas along the south side of the cabin because they were his mother's favorite, and she had passed the year before he did, and I thought she deserved to be there too, in some way. That cabin was the most intentional thing I had ever made. Every nail in it meant something. I want you to understand that before anything else. My daughter was 29 when I broke ground. She came up twice during construction, walked around with her coffee, said it was beautiful, said I was brave, said Daddy would have loved it. She meant all of it. I believe that. She was the girl who used to curl up next to me on the couch during thunderstorms, the one who cried at the end of every school year because she didn't want summer to start without the same classmates. She felt things deeply. She always had. Then she married Bradley. I want to be careful here because I don't believe Bradley is a bad person. I think he's a person who grew up getting what he wanted and never fully understood that other people's things weren't his to want. There's a difference. It doesn't make the behavior less damaging, but I think the distinction matters when you're trying to make sense of how your own family gets turned sideways. The first summer after the cabin was finished, my daughter and Bradley came up for 2 weeks in July. I was there. We cooked on the back deck. We took the canoe out in the evenings. We played cards. It was good. I watched my daughter laugh at the water, and I thought, this is what it was for. The second summer, they came for 3 weeks. I noticed small things. Bradley made a comment about the dock being too short. He said it almost to himself, standing at the edge of the water with a beer in his hand, like he was thinking out loud about a project he was planning. I didn't respond. I thought it was just talk. He mentioned, over dinner one night, that the fire pit was in the wrong place. He said the smoke always blew toward the porch depending on the wind direction. He said a gas insert would solve it. I said I liked the wood fire. He nodded and moved on. My daughter didn't say anything either way. She refilled her glass and changed the subject. The third summer, I got a text message instead of a phone call. I remember that detail because it struck me as odd. My daughter and I had always called each other. The text said that she and Bradley were planning to bring his parents up for the first week of August, and then some of Bradley's college friends the second week, and they were wondering if I might want to come a different time so there'd be more room. I read it twice. Then I called her. She answered on the second ring, and her voice was the voice of someone who had rehearsed. She said they just thought it would be easier. She said Bradley's parents were getting older, and the drive was hard, and they didn't want the cabin to feel crowded. She said I could come in September when the leaves were turning. She said September was beautiful. I said, it's my cabin. She got quiet in a way that told me Bradley was either in the room or she had already had this conversation with him and made up her mind. I said it again, not loudly. It's my cabin. I built it. My name is on the deed. She said she knew that. She said she wasn't saying it wasn't. She said she just thought, for everyone's sake, it might be easier to work out a schedule. I told her I would think about it. I didn't sleep that night. Here is what I did not do, and I regret it. I did not say no immediately, completely, and without apology. I was 64 years old. I had built a cabin with my own hands and my husband's memory, and I said I'll think about it like a woman who needed permission. That's not self-pity. That's just the truth of how it happened. When it's your child on the other end of the phone, something in you goes soft in a place it shouldn't. They went up the first week of August. Bradley's pastors, Bradley's college roommate and his wife and their 3 children. I know this because my daughter sent me photos that she thought were sharing something, but all I could see was a cabin full of people I didn't know sitting in chairs I had bought, cooking in a kitchen I had tiled, sleeping in beds I had made. One of the photos was from the dock. Bradley had extended it himself over the winter, without asking me, without mentioning it. It was longer now. The new wood didn't match. I called my daughter when I saw that. She said Bradley had just wanted to do something nice. She said it made the cabin better. She said I should be grateful someone was maintaining it. Maintaining it, she said, like it was a burden they had taken on. I drove up at the end of August after they had left. Cabin smelled like other people, unfamiliar soap and food I hadn't cooked. There was a coffee mug in the cabinet I didn't recognize. Someone had moved my rocking chair from the left side of the porch to the right, small things. But each one landed like a little message. I sat on the porch that first evening and I watched the water and I thought about my husband saying someday from the car window. I thought about my daughter at 4 years old, how she used to hold onto my hand in parking lots with both of her small ones. I thought about how the distance between that child and the woman who had sent me a text message asking me to visit my own cabin on a schedule she and her husband had approved. I could not explain that distance. I still can't. What happened next is the part that changed everything. I came up for a long weekend in late September, just as my daughter had suggested. The leaves were turning. She was right about that. I pulled up the gravel drive and I walked up to the front door and my key did not work. I tried it twice. I stood on my own porch with my overnight bag and I tried my key in my own door and it did not turn. They had changed the locks. There was no note, no text, no call, nothing explaining what had happened or why. I stood there long enough that I started to feel something colder than anger, something that I can only describe as a clarity. The kind that arrives when you finally understand a situation fully and there is nothing left to soften it. I called my daughter. She didn't answer. I called her twice more. I got in my car. I drove to the gas station at the bottom of the mountain and I sat in the parking lot and I called her again. When she finally answered, her voice was careful and quiet, and I knew before she spoke that she had known this would happen and had let it happen anyway. She said Bradley thought it would be better to have a unified set of keys going forward. She said there had been some concerns about the property being accessed when they weren't there. I asked her what concerns. She said she didn't want to get into it. I asked her who had changed the locks on a property that did not belong to either of them. She said Bradley had taken care of it. I said, your husband changed the locks on my cabin. She said, Mum, can we just talk about this like adults? I hung up, not in anger, or not only in anger. I hung up because I had heard enough. I hung up because I understood now what this was and what it was going to continue to be if I let it. I drove back to Asheville. I have a college friend who lives there, a woman I have known for 40 years, and I showed up at her door at 9 in the evening with my overnight bag, and she didn't ask a single question. She just moved aside and let me in and put the kettle on. I told her everything at her kitchen table. She listened the way only old friends can, without trying to fix it, without immediately offering solutions, just letting me say it all the way through. When I was finished, she said, "What do you want to do?" And I knew. I had probably known since the parking lot. I called a real estate attorney on Monday morning, not to threaten anyone, to understand my position and my options and what my rights actually were as the sole owner of a property that my son-in-law had physically altered and locked without my knowledge or permission. The attorney was a woman about 10 years younger than me, efficient and direct in the way I have always appreciated in people. She explained that what had happened was a form of unauthorized occupancy and that I had clear legal standing. She said I could pursue formal action or I could begin the process of selling. I asked her which she would do. She paused for just a moment and then she said I would remove the thing that's causing the problem. I thought about that for a long time. I thought about trying to take back the cabin, legally, practically. I thought about new locks and formal letters and the back and forth that would follow. I thought about going up there and sitting on a porch that now felt like a contested space. I thought about whether I could ever walk into that kitchen again without feeling what I had felt standing on the porch with my useless key. The cabin had been built for peace, for memory, for the particular kind of quiet that only exists when you are somewhere you love. That was already gone. I could fight for the property and win every legal point and still never get back what it had been. I listed it in October. I did not tell my daughter until the sale was under contract. By then, there was nothing to discuss. It was done, and I had signed, and the closing was set for the week before Thanksgiving. I called her on a Tuesday evening and I told her calmly, "The way you tell someone the weather," she cried. She said I was being vindictive. She said I was punishing her children for something that wasn't their fault. She said I was destroying something her father had wanted for the family. I let her finish. Then I said, "Your father wanted a porch wide enough to sit on with nowhere to be. He never got to sit on it. I built that cabin for his memory and I shared it with you freely, and what your husband did with that is between the two of you and God. I am not punishing anyone. I am protecting what's mine while I still can." She hung up. We didn't speak for almost 3 months. What I did with the money, that part I want to tell you. I had a neighbor, a woman I had known for 6 years. She had her own story, different details, same shape, a daughter-in-law who had slowly made her feel like a guest in her own life. We had talked about it over the fence plenty of times. And I had a woman from my church, widowed 3 years back, whose son had convinced her to add him to the deed on her house just for estate purposes, and then refinanced it without telling her. And there was a woman I met at a grief support group years ago, still sharp and funny and full of plans, who had more or less disappeared from her own family's calendar once she stopped being useful in obvious ways. 4 of us, different ages, different situations, all variations on the same theme. We found a small house on Lake Lure, about 40 minutes from where my cabin had been. Reasonable price, 4 bedrooms, 2 porches, a dock. We worked out a simple arrangement. Each of us contributed an equal share, and we drew up a formal co-ownership agreement with an attorney. Nothing left to chance, nothing handled on a handshake or a feeling or a family understanding. We have a schedule that we each control, and a group text, and a rule that anyone can bring a guest, but no guest can change the locks. That last part was my addition. Everyone agreed to it immediately. The first weekend I spent there, I sat on the east-facing porch in the morning with my coffee, and I watched the mist come off the water. It reminded me of the cabin. Not in a painful way, in the way that certain places carry the same quality of light, the same particular stillness. My husband would have liked it. I believe that. My daughter called in February. It was a Sunday. She said she had been doing a lot of thinking. She said Bradley had some things he wanted to say when I was ready to hear them. I said I was listening when she had things she wanted to say. Not Bradley. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Okay, fair. We are not where we were. I don't know if we will get there." But she called, and I answered, and we talked for 40 minutes about ordinary things. Her kids, my hip that had been bothering me, a show we were both watching. 40 minutes is not nothing. I am 67 years old. I am a widow and a mother and a property owner and a woman who built something from scratch in her grief and then had the sense to protect it when the time came. I have learned, later than I should have maybe, but I have learned that love for your children does not require you to disappear yourself for them. That generosity given from a place of strength is a gift. Generosity given from a place of fear is just loss with a bow on it. The hydrangeas at the old cabin, I don't know if the new owners kept them. I didn't ask. Some things you have to let go in order to carry the parts that matter. What I kept was this, the knowledge that I built something real with intention and that no one can take the building of it from me. Not the locks, not the contract, not 3 months of silence. The lake at Lake Lure has a particular smell in the early morning, pine and water and something I can't name. My husband would have slowed down near it, I think, and pointed at the tree line. He would have said someday, "I got there." It just looked a little different than we planned.